The gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Salida, Colorado, making Eliza Reynolds flinch as she clutched her 5-year-old daughter Sarah closer to her skirt. The year was 1876, and the West was still wild, especially for a widow and her child with nowhere left to run. Blood trickled from Eliza's split lip, and bruises darkened around her wrists where her late husband's brother had grabbed her only hours before, demanding what little money she had left. "Keep walking, Sarah," Eliza whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Remember what Mama said about the man who might help us." The little girl nodded, her golden curls bobbing as she limped alongside her mother. Sarah's own bruises were hidden beneath her tattered dress, but the pain showed in her eyes far too old for a child her age. The sign ahead read, "Xavier Armstrong, Sheriff," in faded black paint. Eliza's heart pounded as they approached the jailhouse. Her sister-in-law had mentioned this man before she died, said he was fair and just, unlike most men who wore a badge in these parts. "Remember your manners," Eliza instructed, straightening her worn bonnet to hide the worst of her bruised face. "And let me do the talking." When they entered the sheriff's office, the air inside was cool compared to the sweltering summer heat. A tall man with broad shoulders sat behind a desk, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat as he wrote in a ledger. His badge caught the light streaming through the dirty windows, and when he looked up, Eliza was struck by eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. "Can I help you, madam?" His deep voice carried the slight drawl of a man who'd spent most of his life in the West, though there was something refined beneath it. Eliza swallowed hard, her courage nearly failing her as Sarah pressed tighter against her skirt. "We were beaten, sir," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "My sister-in-law Martha, before she died, she said you might help." Xavier Armstrong stood slowly, his expression darkening as he took in their injuries. The bruises on Eliza's face were impossible to hide in the direct light, and Sarah's limp was obvious as she shifted nervously. "Martha Reynolds?" he asked, recognition and sadness crossing his features. Eliza nodded, fighting back tears. "Her husband Thomas and his brother Gerald, they—" She couldn't continue, not in front of her daughter. The sheriff knelt down to Sarah's level, his movements gentle despite his imposing frame. "Hello there, little lady, what's your name?" "Sarah," the child whispered, peering out from behind her mother's skirt. "Miss Sarah, would you like a peppermint stick? I keep some in that jar over there for special visitors." The girl looked to her mother for permission, and when Eliza nodded, she hesitantly crossed to the glass jar on the bookshelf. Xavier stood and lowered his voice. "Gerald Reynolds is trouble. I've had my eye on him since Martha's death. Who did this to you, Mrs. Reynolds?" "Eliza Reynolds. I was married to James, Thomas, and Gerald's youngest brother. He died of fever last winter." She touched her split lip. "Gerald says I owe the family money. Says James borrowed from them before he died. When I told him there was none, he—" Her voice trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Xavier's jaw tightened. "And the child?" She tried to stop him. Eliza's voice broke. "We have nowhere else to go. Martha always said if things got bad enough, we should find you." The sheriff's expression softened slightly. "Martha was a good woman. I couldn't help her in time, but I made her a promise I'd look out for her family if they ever needed it." He looked at Sarah, who was carefully selecting a peppermint stick. "I mean to keep that promise." He reached for his hat and placed it on his head. "You'll stay at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house tonight. I'll see to Gerald Reynolds." Eliza shook her head frantically. "No, you don't understand." "If he knows we've come to you, Mrs. Reynolds," Xavier interrupted, his voice steady and reassuring, "I vow to protect you and your daughter. No harm will come to either of you while I draw breath." The conviction in his voice made Eliza pause. It had been so long since anyone had offered help without expecting something in return. "You don't even know us," she said quietly. Xavier's gaze was unflinching. "I know enough. I know Martha wouldn't have sent you if it wasn't important, and I can see with my own eyes that you need help." He adjusted his gun belt. "This town may be rough around the edges, but we look after our own in Salida, and as of right now, That includes you and your daughter." As Sarah returned with her candy, smiling for the first time in days, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. Xavier escorted them to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, a modest two-story building on the edge of town. The elderly proprietress took one look at Eliza's bruised face and Sarah's frightened eyes and bustled them inside without questions, shooting Xavier a knowing glance. "Room at the back, Sheriff." "Most private one I've got. Put it on my account, Mrs. Holloway," Xavier said, tipping his hat. "Nonsense," the woman replied. "These ladies are my guests." As Mrs. Holloway led them upstairs, Eliza looked back at Xavier, who stood in the doorway watching them go. "I'll be back by sundown," he promised. "Lock your door and don't open it for anyone but Mrs. Holloway or myself." When they were settled in the small but clean room, Sarah curled up on the bed and quickly fell asleep, exhausted from their ordeal. Eliza sat by the window, watching the street below, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake in coming here. Gerald had connections throughout the county. What could one sheriff do against such a man? Yet there was something about Xavier Armstrong that made her believe his vow to protect them wasn't just empty words. She touched her bruised cheek, wincing at the pain. For Sarah's sake, she had to trust someone. She just prayed she had chosen correctly. Xavier returned to his office, his mind racing. He had known Gerald Reynolds was trouble, but beating a woman and child was beyond the pale. He pulled a wanted poster from his desk drawer not for Gerald, but for Thomas Reynolds. Both brothers were suspected of stagecoach robberies across the territory, but proof had been elusive. He strapped on an additional revolver and checked his rifle before heading out. His deputy, a young man named Jacob Miller, was returning from his rounds as Xavier exited the jailhouse. "Something wrong, Sheriff?" Jacob asked, noting the extra weapon. "I need you to keep an eye on the Holloway place tonight. Mrs. Reynolds and her daughter are staying there, and Gerald Reynolds might come looking for them." Jacob's expression grew serious. "The woman with the bruised face." "I saw you escorting them earlier," Xavier nodded. "Don't approach the house unless there's trouble. Just keep watch from across the street." "And where will you be?" Having a word with Gerald Reynolds. The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "You want me to come along?" "Those Reynolds brothers don't play fair. All the more reason for you to guard the women." Xavier checked his ammunition once more. "If I'm not back by morning, send a wire to Marshal Holbrook in Denver." As Xavier rode out toward the Reynolds ranch, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The property sat 5 miles outside of town, once a prosperous cattle operation before old man Reynolds died and left it to his sons. Now it was a shadow of its former self, the fences in disrepair and the cattle thin. 2 men lounged on the porch as Xavier approached, both rising quickly when they recognized the sheriff. Neither was Gerald Reynolds. "Sheriff," one called out, his hand hovering near his pistol. "What brings you out this way?" "Looking for Gerald," Xavier replied, stopping his horse at a distance. "Is he around?" The men exchanged glances. "Rode into town earlier, ain't seen him since." Xavier felt a chill that had nothing to do with the coming storm. If Gerald had gone to town, he might already be looking for Eliza and Sarah. He turned his horse sharply and spurred it back toward Salida, riding hard as the first raindrops began to fall. By the time he reached town, the rain was coming down in sheets, turning the main street to mud. He rode straight for the boarding house, relief washing over him when he saw Jacob standing vigilantly under the awning of the general store across the street. "Any sign of Reynolds?" Xavier asked as he dismounted. Jacob shook his head. "Not here, but he was at the saloon about an hour ago, asking questions about a woman and child. Liam the bartender sent word to me, said Reynolds was in a foul mood and drinking heavy." Xavier glanced up at the boarding house windows, noting a faint light in what he knew to be Eliza's room. "Stay here. I'm going to check on them, then find Reynolds before he sobers up enough to cause trouble." Mrs. Holloway answered his knock with a shotgun in hand, relaxing only when she recognized him. "They're upstairs, Sheriff. The little one's been having nightmares, poor thing." Been screaming out about a bad man coming to get them. Xavier's expression darkened. Has anyone else come by asking about them? No, but Liam's boy from the saloon was here warning me that Gerald Reynolds is on the warpath. Said he's blaming you for harboring thieves. Thieves. Xavier's brow furrowed. Says the woman stole money from him. Mrs. Holloway snorted derisively. That man wouldn't know the truth if it bit him on the backside. Xavier climbed the stairs and knocked softly on Eliza's door. Mrs. Reynolds, it's Sheriff Armstrong. There was silence, then the sound of a chair being moved. How do I know it's really you? Eliza's voice was tight with fear. Your daughter picked a peppermint stick from my jar this afternoon, the red and white kind. The lock clicked and the door opened just enough for Eliza to peer out. Relief flooded her face when she saw it was indeed him. Thank God, we heard Gerald was in town. May I come in, just for a moment? She hesitated, then stepped back. The room was dimly lit by a single oil lamp. Sarah was asleep on the bed, her face tear-stained. She's been having bad dreams, Eliza explained, keeping her voice low. Wakes up screaming that Uncle Gerald is coming to take her away. Xavier's heart twisted at the thought of the child's terror. I won't let that happen. I've come to tell you I'm going to find Reynolds tonight and put an end to this. Eliza's eyes widened. You can't confront him alone, he'll kill you. I've dealt with worse men than Gerald Reynolds. You don't understand, she insisted, moving closer and lowering her voice further. Martha told me things before she died, things about Gerald and Thomas. They're not just bullies, they're killers. They robbed the Denver stagecoach last spring. A guard was shot. Xavier's eyes narrowed. Martha had proof. Eliza glanced nervously at her sleeping daughter. She kept a journal. Dates, times, amounts taken. She showed it to me once, said it was insurance in case Thomas ever tried to hurt her or the children. Where is this journal now? I don't know. After she died, I searched her house, but it was gone. I think Thomas found it. She wrung her hands. All I know is what she told me, and without that journal, it's just my word against theirs. Xavier considered this information. If he could find that journal, he could put both Reynolds brothers away for a long time. But first, he needed to ensure Eliza and Sarah's immediate safety. I want you to pack your things, he said. I'm taking you someplace safer tonight. Where? My sister's place. It's a small ranch just outside town. Abigail lives alone since her husband passed, but she's a crack shot and the ranch hands are loyal. Reynolds won't think to look for you there. Eliza hesitated. Why are you doing all this for us? You barely know us. Xavier was silent for a moment. I knew Martha. We grew up together. When she married Thomas, I warned her about the Reynolds' reputation, but she was in love. His jaw tightened. After her death, I promised myself I'd never stand by again if someone needed help. The sincerity in his voice moved something in Eliza. She had been so long without kindness that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. Thank you, she whispered. Pack quickly, he instructed. I'll arrange for a wagon. The rain should cover our tracks. Within half an hour, Xavier had Eliza and a still sleeping Sarah in a covered wagon driven by his most trusted ranch hand, a man named Emmett who had worked for the Armstrong family for 20 years. Take them to Abigail's, Xavier instructed. Use the back trail, don't stop for anyone. Emmett nodded grimly. What will you be doing, Sheriff, finding Gerald Reynolds before he finds them? As the wagon pulled away, Eliza looked back at Xavier standing in the rain, his hand resting on his revolver. For the first time since James died, she felt a flicker of something beyond fear and grief, a feeling she dared not name. Xavier watched until the wagon disappeared into the rainy darkness before turning toward the saloon. If Gerald Reynolds wanted a reckoning, he would find one tonight. The Golden Nugget Saloon was busier than usual due to the rain, cowboys and townsfolk alike seeking shelter from the storm. The air inside was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. Xavier paused at the entrance, scanning the room until his eyes fell on Gerald Reynolds, hunched over a table in the corner with two other men. He approached slowly, aware that conversations hushed as he passed. By the time he reached Reynolds's table, the entire saloon had fallen silent except for the tinny piano in the far corner. "Reynolds," Xavier said, his voice carrying in the quiet room. "I need a word." Gerald looked up, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. "Well, if it ain't the high and mighty sheriff, come to explain why you're harboring thieves in my town, your town." Xavier's tone was dangerously soft. "Last I checked, Salida belongs to all its citizens, including women and children who have the right to live without fear of being beaten." Gerald pushed to his feet, swaying slightly. "That woman stole from me. Family business, Sheriff, nothing that concerns you. Assaulting a woman and child concerns me very much." Xavier's hand remained near his gun. "I'm placing you under arrest, Reynolds. We can do this quietly or we can make a scene. Your choice." The two men flanking Gerald stood, their hands hovering near their weapons. The piano player stopped abruptly and several patrons edged toward the doors. Gerald sneered. "3 against 1, Sheriff. Bad odds." "I only count one," Xavier replied calmly. "These other 2 gentlemen are smart enough to know that interfering with an arrest is a hanging offense." He glanced at the men. "Isn't that right, boys?" The uncertainty in their eyes told Xavier they weren't willing to die for Gerald Reynolds. After a tense moment, one stepped back, raising his hands slightly. "This ain't our fight, Gerald," he muttered. Reynolds's face contorted with rage. "Cowards, both of you!" While Gerald was distracted, Xavier moved with surprising speed for a man his size. He grabbed Reynolds's wrist, twisting until the man dropped the knife he'd been reaching for, then slammed him face down on the table, pinning his arm behind his back. "Like I said," Xavier growled, "we can do this quietly or we can make a scene. Seems you've chosen the latter." As he secured handcuffs around Reynolds's wrists, the saloon doors burst open. Deputy Miller stood there, rain dripping from his hat. "Sheriff, Thomas Reynolds just rode into town with 4 men. They're headed for the boarding house," Xavier cursed under his breath. He hauled Gerald to his feet. "Your brother joining the party." Gerald's bloody grin was answer enough. "Miller, lock this one up," Xavier ordered, shoving Gerald toward the deputy. "Then get to Mrs. Holloway's and tell her to bar the doors. I'll handle Thomas." "You're a dead man, Armstrong," Gerald spat as Miller dragged him away. "Thomas won't stop until he finds that woman and what she took." Xavier paused. "What exactly did she take, Reynolds?" "That ain't your concern. Family business." "The journal," Xavier pressed. "The one Martha kept." The flash of surprise in Gerald's eyes confirmed Xavier's suspicion. Eliza had been right, the journal existed, and the Reynolds brothers were desperate to find it. By the time Xavier reached the boarding house, Thomas Reynolds and his men had already discovered that Eliza and Sarah were gone. Mrs. Holloway stood on her porch, shotgun in hand, while Thomas ranted from the street. "Where are they, old woman?" he shouted. "I know Armstrong brought them here." "Get off my property, Reynolds," Mrs. Holloway called back, raising the shotgun. "Sheriff's already locked up your brother." "You want to join him?" Thomas turned at the sound of Xavier's approach, his face twisting into a snarl. Unlike Gerald, Thomas Reynolds was lean and calculating and far more dangerous for it. "Armstrong," he growled. "Should have known you'd stick your nose in family business." Xavier dismounted, keeping his horse between himself and Reynolds's men. "Beating women and children isn't family business, Thomas. It's a crime. That woman has something that belongs to me. Tell me where she is and we'll be on our way." "She doesn't have your journal if that's what you're after." Xavier kept his voice steady, watching Thomas's reaction carefully. "Martha hid it well before she died." Thomas's expression flickered with uncertainty before hardening again. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Martha was smart. She knew what you and Gerald were involved in. The stagecoach robberies, the murdered guard. She kept records as insurance. Xavier took a step forward. "The question is, what would the territorial marshal make of those records?" Thomas's hand inched toward his gun. "You got nothing, Sheriff. Just the word of a thieving widow. Maybe, or maybe Martha's journal is already on its way to Denver." Xavier knew he was taking a risk, but he needed to shift Thomas's focus away from Eliza and Sarah. You can chase after a widow and her child, or you can start running before the marshals come looking for you." Thomas's eyes narrowed as he weighed his options. Finally, he spat into the mud. "This ain't over, Armstrong, not by a long shot." He turned to his men. "Mount up, we're leaving." As they rode away, Mrs. Holloway lowered her shotgun with a shaky breath. "That was too close, Sheriff. They searched the whole house before I could stop them." "You did well, Mrs. Holloway." Xavier climbed back onto his horse. "I need to make sure Mrs. Reynolds and her daughter are safe." "Can you manage here?" the old woman snorted. "Been managing since before you were born, Sheriff. Go on now." Xavier rode hard through the rain toward his sister's ranch. The storm had intensified, lightning occasionally illuminating the muddy trail ahead. He couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas Reynolds wasn't truly leaving town. Men like him didn't give up so easily. When he reached the ranch, lights still burned in the windows despite the late hour. Abigail met him at the door, rifle in hand. "They're safe," she assured him before he could ask. "The little one's asleep in the spare room. Eliza's with her." Relief washed over him. "Thomas Reynolds and his men might be heading this way. They're looking for something they think Eliza has." Abigail's expression hardened. "Let them come. Jim and the other hands are on alert, and you know I never miss." Xavier smiled faintly. His older sister had always been fearless. After her husband died 2 years ago, she had taken over running the ranch with the same determination she applied to everything in life. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "What they did to that woman and her child?" Xavier nodded grimly. "I've seen men do terrible things, Abby, but there's something especially vile about hurting those who can't fight back." Abigail studied her brother's face. "This is more than just doing your job, isn't it?" Before he could answer, a floorboard creaked behind them. They turned to find Eliza standing in the hallway, a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "I heard voices," she explained. "I wanted to make sure everything was all right." Xavier removed his hat. "Gerald's locked up. Thomas and his men were at the boarding house, but they've left town." "You don't believe that," Eliza said, reading his expression. "No," he admitted. "I don't." Abigail glanced between them. "I'll check on the men," she said tactfully, grabbing a raincoat from a hook by the door. "Make sure they're keeping watch." After she left, Eliza stepped closer to the fire burning in the hearth. "Your sister has been very kind." "Abby's the best person I know," Xavier replied, joining her by the fire. "How's Sarah?" sleeping soundly for the first time in weeks. Eliza's voice softened. "She feels safe here." Xavier studied her in the firelight. With her guard down, he could see the beauty that bruises couldn't hide, the delicate curve of her cheekbone, the determination in her eyes, the strength that had carried her through unimaginable hardship. "You should try to rest," he suggested. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next." Eliza turned to face him fully. "What did you tell Thomas to make him leave?" "I bluffed," Xavier admitted. "Made him think Martha's journal was on its way to the territorial marshal in Denver." "He won't believe that for long." Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. "Once he talks to Gerald, they'll know I don't have it." "Do you have any idea where Martha might have hidden it?" Eliza hesitated. "Before she died, she mentioned something about keeping the truth where the light touches it every day. I never understood what she meant." Xavier considered this. "The church, maybe." Martha was religious. So was Thomas, or at least he pretended to be. Eliza shook her head. "She wouldn't hide it somewhere he visited regularly." "We'll figure it out," Xavier promised. "In the meantime, you and Sarah will stay here where it's safe." Eliza looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You've done so much for us already. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Seeing Sarah smile today was payment enough," he replied honestly. Something passed between them then, a moment of understanding that needed no words. Xavier was the first to break the connection, clearing his throat. "I should let you get some sleep," he said, reaching for his hat. "I'll be in the bunkhouse with the ranch hands if you need anything." Eliza caught his hand before he could turn away. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing us when no one else would." Her touch sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with the fire. "Get some rest, Mrs. Reynolds. Tomorrow's a new day." As Xavier walked through the rain to the bunkhouse, he tried to ignore the feeling stirring in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since losing his wife to cholera 5 years ago. Eliza Reynolds needed his protection, not his affection, he reminded himself sternly. And yet, the memory of her hand on his lingered like a promise. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. Xavier woke early, finding Abigail already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. The men reported no disturbances, she informed him as she cracked eggs into a skillet. But Jim found tracks about a mile east of the property. Someone was watching the ranch. Xavier frowned. Thomas Reynolds, most likely. Abigail placed a cup of coffee in front of him. "What's your plan, Xav? You can't keep them here forever, and those Reynolds brothers won't give up easily." Before he could answer, Sarah came running into the kitchen, her golden curls bouncing. The bruises on her face were fading, and for the first time Xavier saw the carefree child she should have been all along. "Mr. Sheriff," she exclaimed, climbing onto the chair beside him. "Miss Abigail said you might take me to see the horses today." Xavier couldn't help smiling. "Did she now?" "Well, I suppose we could arrange that after breakfast." Eliza appeared in the doorway, looking rested despite the circumstances. She wore a simple blue dress that Abigail had loaned her, and her hair was neatly braided over one shoulder. "Sarah, don't bother the sheriff," she admonished gently. "He has important work to do." "Nothing more important than showing a young lady the horses," Xavier assured her, winking at Sarah. "Isn't that right, Miss Sarah?" The child nodded enthusiastically. "Mama used to have a horse before Uncle Gerald sold him." A shadow crossed Eliza's face at the mention of Gerald Reynolds. "Sarah, why don't you help Miss Abigail with breakfast?" As Sarah hopped down to assist Abigail, Eliza joined Xavier at the table, lowering her voice. "Any news?" "Thomas and his men were watching the ranch last night," he replied quietly. "They didn't approach, but they're still in the area." Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the coffee Abigail offered. "What do we do now?" "I've been thinking about what you said about Martha hiding the journal where the light touches it every day." Xavier leaned closer. "What about the schoolhouse? Martha was a teacher before she married Thomas, wasn't she?" Eliza's eyes widened. "Yes, at the schoolhouse in Brookside, the next town over. She loved that place." Her expression grew thoughtful. "The eastern windows. She always said she loved how the morning light came through them." "It's worth checking," Xavier decided. "I'll ride to Brookside today." If the journal is there, it could be the evidence we need to put Thomas and Gerald away for good. "I want to come with you," Eliza insisted. "I know the schoolhouse. I might notice something you'd miss." Xavier shook his head. "It's too dangerous. If Thomas is watching the ranch, he'll follow us." "Then we'll make sure he does," Eliza countered. "While Sarah stays here with your sister, safe and protected." Xavier studied her determined expression. "You're not what I expected, Mrs. Reynolds." A faint smile touched her lips. "Neither are you, Sheriff Armstrong." After breakfast, Xavier explained the plan to Abigail, who agreed to keep Sarah safe with the help of the ranch hands. The little girl was initially upset about being left behind, but the promise of learning to feed the chickens with Abigail soon distracted her. As Xavier and Eliza prepared to leave, Sarah threw her arms around her mother's waist. "You'll come back, won't you, Mama?" The fear in her voice broke Eliza's heart. Kneeling down, Eliza cupped her daughter's face. "Nothing in this world could keep me from coming back to you, my love. You be good for Miss Abigail, and when I return, perhaps we can talk about staying in Salida permanently." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Really? We won't have to keep running, really?" Eliza promised, glancing up at Xavier, who nodded slightly. As they rode out, Xavier led them on a roundabout route, occasionally doubling back to confirm his suspicion that they were being followed. Sure enough, about 2 miles from the ranch, he spotted dust rising from a ridge to their east. "Thomas has at least 2 men with him," he told Eliza, keeping his voice casual in case they were being watched. "They're hanging back, probably waiting to see where we're headed." Eliza straightened in her saddle, fighting the urge to look behind them. Will we make it to Brookside before they catch up? That's the plan. The schoolhouse is on the edge of town. If we're lucky, we can find the journal and reach the marshal's office before Thomas makes his move. They rode steadily through the morning, the summer sun climbing high overhead. Xavier kept them to the main trail, wanting their pursuers to believe they were heading straight for Brookside. "Tell me about your husband," Xavier said as they rode, partly to pass the time and partly because he wanted to know more about the woman beside him. Eliza was quiet for a moment. James was the youngest Reynolds brother. He was, different from Thomas and Gerald, gentler. He worked as a clerk in Denver, which is where we met. After we married, his brothers pressured him to join the family business at the ranch. She sighed. I think he knew what they were involved in, but he never had the courage to stand against them. When he died of fever last winter, Gerald claimed James owed them money. He took our house, our horse, everything of value. Sarah and I were only allowed to stay on the ranch if I worked as their housekeeper. Xavier's jaw tightened. And the beatings started about 3 months ago when I refused Gerald's advances. Eliza's voice hardened. I would have endured anything myself, but when he struck Sarah for spilling milk, that's when I knew we had to leave. You did the right thing, Xavier assured her. No one should live like that, especially not a child. Eliza looked at him curiously. Abigail mentioned you were married once. 5 years ago, he confirmed. Rebecca died of cholera. We were only married 2 years. I'm sorry, Eliza said softly. She must have been special. She was. Xavier's expression grew distant. After she died, I left my position as a Pinkerton agent and came home to Salida. Needed to be around family. A Pinkerton, Eliza's eyes widened. That explains a lot. Xavier raised an eyebrow. Such as how you move, she replied. Always aware of everything around you, how you handled Gerald at the boarding house. I've never seen anyone move that fast. He smiled slightly. The agency teaches you to be observant. It's a skill that's served me well as sheriff. They reached Brookside by early afternoon. The town was smaller than Salida, little more than a main street with a few businesses and homes scattered around it. The schoolhouse stood on the outskirts, a simple wooden building with a small bell tower. Xavier dismounted first, helping Eliza down from her horse. Stay close, he murmured, scanning the surrounding area. Their pursuers hadn't shown themselves yet, but he knew they were nearby. The schoolhouse door was unlocked, as was common in small towns where community buildings served multiple purposes. Inside, the single room was neat and orderly, with rows of desks facing a larger teacher's desk at the front. Sunlight streamed through the eastern windows, just as Eliza had described. Martha taught here for 3 years before marrying Thomas, Eliza explained, running her hand along the teacher's desk. She loved these children like they were her own. Xavier examined the room carefully. If she hid the journal here, it would be somewhere secure but accessible to her, somewhere only she would think to look. Eliza moved to the eastern windows, studying how the light fell across the room. Where the light touches it every day, she murmured, her eyes following the path of sunlight across the floorboards up the wall to a row of books on a high shelf. The books, she said suddenly. Martha loved to read. She was always quoting Shakespeare. Xavier followed her gaze to the shelf where several leather-bound volumes stood in a neat row. Which was her favorite? Much Ado About Nothing, Eliza replied without hesitation. She said it reminded her that love could overcome deception. Xavier brought over a chair and climbed up to reach the high shelf. He ran his fingers along the spines until he found a copy of Shakespeare's works. When he pulled it down, the book felt unusually heavy. Opening it, he discovered the pages had been hollowed out, creating a hiding place that contained a small leather journal. This must be it, he said, handing it down to Eliza. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, in Martha's neat handwriting, were dates, locations, and amounts, detailed records of stagecoach robberies spanning 3 years. Names were included as well, Thomas and Gerald Reynolds, along with several of their associates. "This is evidence of at least 12 robberies," Xavier said as he skimmed the pages. "And the murder of that guard near Denver, it's enough to hang them both." The sound of horses approaching made them both look up. Through the windows, they could see Thomas Reynolds and 3 men dismounting outside. "We need to go," Xavier said urgently, tucking the journal inside his vest. "Is there a back way out?" Eliza nodded. "Through the supply room. It leads to a path behind the building." They hurried toward the rear of the schoolhouse, but before they reached the door, it burst open. One of Thomas's men stood there, gun drawn, going somewhere. He sneered. Xavier reacted instantly, drawing his revolver and firing in one fluid motion. The man crumpled with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. Xavier grabbed Eliza's hand and pulled her through the doorway, stepping over the wounded man. They ran down the path behind the schoolhouse, heading for a small grove of trees where they might find cover. Behind them, shouts and gunfire erupted as Thomas and his remaining men gave chase. "The horses," Eliza gasped as they ran. "Too late," Xavier replied grimly. "They'll have secured them by now. We need to reach the marshal's office in town." A bullet splintered the bark of a tree near Eliza's head. Xavier pushed her down behind a fallen log, drawing his second revolver. "Stay low," he ordered, returning fire to give their pursuers pause. "The journal," Eliza said urgently. "If something happens to us, they'll get it back and destroy it." Xavier knew she was right. The evidence in that journal was their only hope of bringing the Reynolds brothers to justice permanently. He made a quick decision, pulling the journal from his vest. "Take it," he told her, pressing it into her hands. "Get to the marshal's office. I'll hold them off." Eliza shook her head frantically. "No, I won't leave you. Sarah needs her mother," Xavier said firmly. "This isn't up for debate. When I start firing, you run straight for town. Don't look back." Tears filled Eliza's eyes, but she nodded, clutching the journal to her chest. Xavier squeezed her hand once, then rose to a crouch, both revolvers ready. "Now," he shouted, standing and firing rapidly at the approaching men. Eliza ran, her heart pounding as she heard the continued exchange of gunfire behind her. She clutched the journal tightly, forcing herself not to look back even when she heard a cry of pain that might have been Xavier's voice. The main street of Brookside appeared ahead, people scattering at the sound of gunshots. Eliza spotted the marshal's office and ran toward it, bursting through the door with a desperate cry for help. The marshal, a grizzled man named Hatcher, looked up in surprise. "What in tarnation? Sheriff Armstrong from Salida is pinned down by the schoolhouse," she gasped, thrusting the journal at him. "Thomas Reynolds and his men. This journal contains evidence of their crime stagecoach robberies, murder. Please, you have to help him." Marshal Hatcher flipped through the journal quickly, his expression darkening. "Jackson," he called to his deputy. "Get the posse together. We've got Reynolds' gang members at the schoolhouse." As men scrambled to respond, Eliza sank into a chair, praying she hadn't left Xavier too late. The next hour passed in a blur. Hatcher and 6 armed men rode out toward the schoolhouse while Eliza waited in agony at the marshal's office. When they finally returned, 4 prisoners in tow, she rushed to the door, searching desperately for Xavier. Relief flooded her when she saw him riding alongside Marshal Hatcher, his left arm bandaged but otherwise appearing unharmed. Thomas Reynolds and his men rode with their hands bound, defeat written across their faces. "You're alive," she breathed as Xavier dismounted. "Takes more than Reynolds and his boys to put me down," he replied with a tired smile. The marshal arrived just in time. Marshal Hatcher approached, holding the journal. "This evidence is rock solid, Mrs. Reynolds. With this and the attempted murder of a sheriff, Thomas and his men will hang. Once we wire Denver about Gerald, he'll join them." "And we'll be safe?" Eliza asked, hardly daring to believe it could be true. "You and your daughter won't have to worry about the Reynolds brothers ever again," Hatcher assured her. Xavier placed his good hand on her shoulder. "Let's go home to Sarah." The ride back to the Armstrong ranch was considerably more relaxed than their journey to Brookside. Xavier's wound had been treated by the town doctor, a clean shot through the flesh of his upper arm that would heal nicely with time. "You were very brave today," he told Eliza as they rode side by side in the late afternoon sun. She shook her head. "I was terrified. You're the brave one." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Xavier replied. "It's acting despite it. You've shown more courage in protecting your daughter than most men I've known in battle." Eliza glanced at him. "What happens now, after Gerald is transferred to Denver with the others?" "That depends on you," Xavier said carefully. "You mentioned to Sarah about staying in Salida permanently." "I did," she admitted, "but I have no home, no means of supporting us." "The school in Salida needs a teacher," Xavier suggested. "Martha always spoke highly of your education, and Mrs. Holloway mentioned she's been looking for help managing the boarding house." Hope flickered in Eliza's eyes. "You think I could teach?" "I think you could do anything you set your mind to," he replied sincerely. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Sarah burst from the house the moment she heard them approaching, running to meet her mother with outstretched arms. Eliza dismounted quickly, gathering her daughter close. "I missed you so much, my love. Did you and the sheriff catch the bad men?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "We did," Eliza assured her. "They can't hurt us anymore." Sarah looked up at Xavier, who had dismounted more slowly due to his injured arm. "Are you hurt, Mr. Sheriff?" He knelt down to her level, smiling. "Just a scratch, nothing that won't heal." The child surprised him by throwing her arms around his neck. "Thank you for keeping Mama safe," she whispered. Xavier's heart constricted as he gently returned her embrace. "That's a promise I intend to keep," he replied, looking over Sarah's head to meet Eliza's gaze. The weeks that followed brought significant changes to Eliza and Sarah's lives. Gerald Reynolds was transferred to Denver along with his brother and their associates. The territorial court moved swiftly, and by summer's end, justice had been served. The Reynolds brothers would never harm another person again. With Xavier's recommendation, Eliza was appointed as the new teacher at Salida's school. She and Sarah moved into a small house near the schoolhouse, which came with the position. The community welcomed them warmly, particularly after hearing of their ordeal and Xavier's role in bringing the Reynolds gang to justice. Xavier visited often, initially under the pretense of ensuring their safety, but soon it became clear to everyone in town that his interest was more personal. He brought books for the school, helped repair the roof before winter set in, and took Sarah riding on his gentle mare every Sunday after church. As autumn painted the Colorado landscape in brilliant colors, Xavier found Eliza in the schoolyard after classes one afternoon. She was watching Sarah play with other children, a contented smile on her face. "They're adjusting well," Xavier observed as he joined her. Eliza nodded. "Sarah has nightmares less frequently now. Having friends her own age has helped immensely." She turned to face him. "And your arm? Is it fully healed?" "Good as new," he assured her, flexing it to demonstrate. He hesitated, then said, "I've been meaning to ask you something, Eliza." She raised an eyebrow at his use of her first name. "Yes, the Founders' Day dance is next Saturday. I was wondering if you might accompany me." A blush rose to her cheeks. As the sheriff escorting the new teacher, or something else? Xavier took a deep breath. "Definitely something else." He took her hand gently in his. "These past months getting to know you and Sarah, they've been the happiest I've had in years. I find myself thinking about you both constantly." Eliza's eyes softened. "Sarah adores you. She asks every day if Mr. Sheriff is coming to visit." "And what about her mother?" Xavier asked quietly. "How does she feel?" Instead of answering immediately, Eliza glanced toward her daughter, ensuring she was still playing with her friends. Then she turned back to Xavier and, standing on tiptoe, pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Her mother thinks it's time to start living again, not just surviving," she whispered. "And she would be honored to attend the dance with you." Xavier's smile could have lit the darkening sky. "I'll pick you both up at 6. Sarah mentioned she wants to watch the dancing." "Sarah mentioned that, did she?" Eliza laughed. She's becoming quite the little matchmaker." "Smart girl," Xavier replied with a wink. "Takes after her mother." The Founders' Day dance transformed the town hall into a wonderland of autumn decorations and twinkling lanterns. Sarah watched wide-eyed as couples twirled across the floor, Xavier and Eliza among them. In her simple blue dress, with her hair styled by Mrs. Holloway, Eliza felt beautiful for the first time in years. "Everyone is staring," she whispered to Xavier as he led her through a waltz. "Because you're the most beautiful woman in the room," he replied without hesitation. Eliza laughed softly. "I think it's more likely because they're shocked to see their serious sheriff smiling so much." "You give me reason to smile," he said simply. Later, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, Sarah skipped ahead, chattering excitedly about the dancing and the sweets she'd been given. "She's happy here," Eliza observed. "We both are." Xavier took her hand, entwining their fingers. "I meant what I said that day in my office, Eliza. I vowed to protect you both, and I intend to keep that vow for as long as you'll let me." She stopped walking, turning to face him fully in the moonlight. "Are you proposing, Sheriff Armstrong?" "Not quite yet," he replied with a smile. "When I do, I'll have a ring and a properly rehearsed speech. But I am declaring my intentions. I love you, Eliza Reynolds, and I love that little girl as if she were my own." Tears glistened in Eliza's eyes. "I never thought I'd find happiness again after James died. I certainly never expected to find it with the sheriff who took in two strangers on nothing more than a promise to a friend." "Is that a yes to my future proposal?" Xavier asked, his voice hopeful. Eliza's laugh was like music in the quiet night. "It's a yes to whatever future we build together, Xavier Armstrong." He bent to kiss her then, a gentle kiss that held the promise of all the tomorrows to come. "Mama, Mr. Sheriff, are you kissing?" Sarah's delighted voice broke them apart. She stood a few yards away, hands clasped to her chest in excitement. Xavier chuckled. "Is that all right with you, Miss Sarah?" The child considered this seriously before nodding. "Does this mean you'll be my new papa?" Eliza knelt down to her daughter's level. "Would you like that, sweetheart?" Sarah's answer was to throw her arms around both of them. "I asked Santa for a papa for Christmas. He came early." Over the child's head, Xavier and Eliza exchanged looks of pure joy. From the darkest moments of their lives had come a light neither expected to find again, the light of family, of belonging, of love. Winter came to Salida, bringing with it the first Christmas that Eliza and Sarah would celebrate in their new home. Xavier had been true to his word, proposing properly on a crisp November evening with a simple gold ring and a speech that had made Eliza cry happy tears. They were to be married on New Year's Day, a fresh beginning to match the fresh start they'd found together. Christmas Eve found them gathered in Eliza's small house, a fire crackling in the hearth and a modest tree decorated with handmade ornaments. Sarah was beside herself with excitement, both for Santa's imminent arrival and for the wedding that would make Xavier officially her new father. "Time for bed, little one," Eliza said as the clock struck 8. "Santa won't come if you're still awake." Sarah hugged Xavier tightly. "Will you still be here in the morning?" "I'll be here before you wake up," he promised. "We'll open presents together just like a family." Once Sarah was tucked in, Xavier and Eliza sat before the fire, enjoying a rare moment of quiet togetherness. "I have something for you," Xavier said, pulling a small package from his pocket. "I know we agreed to wait until tomorrow for gifts, but this one couldn't wait." Curious, Eliza unwrapped the package to find a document bearing the territorial seal. As she read it, her hand flew to her mouth. "Adoption papers," she whispered. Xavier nodded. "If you agree, I'd like to legally adopt Sarah after we're married." She would become Sarah Armstrong in name as well as in heart. Tears filled Eliza's eyes. She'll be overjoyed. She already introduces herself as Sarah Armstrong to anyone who'll listen. "And her mother?" Xavier asked softly. "Is she pleased with becoming Mrs. Armstrong?" Eliza set the papers aside and moved closer to him on the sofa. "More than she can possibly express," she murmured, leaning in to kiss him. New Year's Day dawned clear and cold, the sun reflecting blindingly off fresh snow. The entire town turned out for the wedding, held in the small church on Main Street. Sarah, serving as flower girl, beamed with pride as she walked down the aisle ahead of her mother. Eliza wore a dress of deep blue velvet, a gift from Abigail, with her hair styled simply and adorned with white flowers. Xavier, waiting at the altar in his best suit, thought she had never looked more beautiful. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days, Xavier added a special vow of his own. "From the moment you walked into my office and said we were beaten, sir. Mama said you might help. I knew my life would never be the same," he said, his voice carrying throughout the small church. "I vowed then to protect you both forever, and today I renew that vow with all my heart. You and Sarah are my family now, and nothing in this world will ever harm you again while I draw breath." There wasn't a dry eye in the church as they sealed their vows with a kiss. Sarah couldn't contain her excitement, rushing forward to embrace them both as the congregation erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration continued at the town hall, where the community had prepared a feast and decorated for dancing. As twilight fell, Xavier led his new wife onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. "Happy, Mrs. Armstrong?" he asked as they swayed to the music. Eliza's smile was radiant. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." Sarah joined them on the dance floor, and Xavier lifted her up, including her in their dance as the three of them laughed together. Looking on, Abigail wiped away a tear, grateful to see her brother whole again after so many years of loneliness. Later that night, after Sarah had fallen asleep in Abigail's guest room where she would stay until the newlyweds returned from their brief honeymoon in Denver, Xavier and Eliza stood on the porch of what would soon be their family home, a small ranch Xavier had purchased on the outskirts of town. "It needs some work," he admitted as they looked at the moonlit structure. "But by spring, it'll be ready for us." "It's perfect," Eliza said, leaning against his shoulder. "Room for Sarah to grow, maybe even for brothers or sisters someday." Xavier's arm tightened around her waist. "I'd like that very much." As they stood together under the vast Colorado sky, both reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From fear and pain had come healing and joy, from desperation had come hope, and from a vow made in the heat of crisis had grown a love that would last a lifetime. "Thank you," Eliza whispered. "For what?" "For being the kind of man who helps strangers in need, for keeping your vow." She turned in his arms to face him. "For loving us." Xavier brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "Loving you and Sarah is the easiest thing I've ever done," he replied, "and the most rewarding." As the new year began around them, bringing with it the promise of all the tomorrows they would share, Xavier bent to kiss his wife once more, sealing with that kiss the vow he had made and would keep forever. To protect, to cherish, and most of all, to love the family that fate had brought to his door on that fateful summer day. 5 years later, the Armstrong Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the county. Xavier had hung up his sheriff's badge 2 years earlier to focus on ranching and raising his growing family. Sarah, now 10, had been joined by 3-year-old twins James and Rebecca, named for those they had lost but never forgotten. Eliza continued to teach at the school, having discovered a true passion for education. Under her guidance, the Salida School had expanded to include a library and programs for the children of the migrant workers who passed through the region. On a warm summer evening, much like the one when they had first met, Xavier sat on the front porch watching Sarah help the twins feed the chickens. Eliza joined him, setting a glass of lemonade at his side before taking the seat next to him. "Mrs. Holloway stopped by the school today," she said. She mentioned a family just arrived in town, a mother and 2 children. The woman's face was bruised. Xavier glanced at his wife, recognizing the look in her eyes. "You invited them to dinner, didn't you?" Eliza nodded. The woman reminded me of myself 5 years ago, terrified, desperate, with nowhere to turn. I told her about a sheriff who once helped a stranger and her child when they had no hope left. Xavier took her hand, squeezing it gently. "What was her response?" she cried, Eliza said softly. "Then she asked if that kind of man still existed in Salida." "And you said," Eliza smiled, looking out at their children playing in the yard. "I told her that kindness lives on in the community he helped build, that Salida protects its own, especially those who need it most." Xavier nodded, understanding. "We'll set an extra place at the table, 3 extra places." As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors that had welcomed them home after defeating the Reynolds brothers, Xavier reflected on how a single moment of compassion had changed everything. One woman's courage in asking for help, one man's vow to provide it from these simple acts had grown a love story, a family, and a legacy of kindness that would continue for generations to come. "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked suddenly. "Taking in 2 strangers that day?" "Your life might have been simpler without us." Xavier turned to her, his eyes reflecting all the love in his heart. "Simpler maybe, but empty. You and Sarah were never strangers, Eliza. From the moment you walked into my office, you were my future. I just didn't know it yet." She leaned her head against his shoulder, content in the life they had built together. "We were beaten, sir," she murmured, echoing the words that had begun their story. "Mama said you might help." Xavier pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I always will," he promised. "Until my dying day and beyond." As their children's laughter filled the air around them, Xavier and Eliza Armstrong held hands, their fingers entwined like their lives and hearts unbreakable, enduring, forever bound by a vow made and kept through all the seasons of their love.